The Deception of Daniel Shin. Daniel Shin was the epitome of success. A Korean-American businessman with a sharp mind and striking features, his handsome face and impeccable style turned heads wherever he went. With a reputation for being tough but fair, Daniel had carved out a successful career in contract law, a field where precision and determination were key. Today, like any other day, he was finishing up late at the office, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside his door. Mitch Green, a man who had once been a friend, now stood seething in the hallway. Mitch had recently signed a contract that had unfavorable terms, a realization that dawned on him too late. His desperation had led him to Daniel's office, where he planned to plead his case. He knew Daniel well enough to wait until the end of the workday when the office would be empty, leaving Daniel alone and vulnerable. As the clock struck 6, Mitch burst into Daniel's office. The once friendly face was now contorted with frustration and anger. "Daniel, you've got to help me. This contract is a trap, and you know it," Mitch pleaded, his voice trembling. Daniel looked up from his desk, a smirk playing on his lips. "Mitch, you signed the contract. You should have read the fine print. I'm not voiding anything." Mitch's heart pounded in his chest. "Please, Daniel, I'm begging you." Daniel laughed, the sound echoing in the empty office. "Beg all you want, Mitch. It's not happening." Hot with frustration, Mitch's eyes darkened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a loaded gun, pointing it directly at Daniel. "You think this is funny? How about now?" Daniel's heart dropped. His arms shot up instinctively, his mind racing. Okay, just calm down, Mitch. There's no need for this." Mitch's hand shook slightly, but his resolve was firm. "The combination to the safe, Daniel. Now." Daniel's mind spun, but he knew he had no choice. "It's 14-23-7. Mitch backed towards the safe, keeping the gun trained on Daniel. He quickly punched in the combination, his hands trembling. The safe door swung open, revealing a stack of documents. Mitch rifled through them until he found the contract he was looking for. Satisfied, he turned back to Daniel. "You shouldn't have laughed at me, Daniel. Now you're going to pay." Mitch grabbed a length of rope from the supply closet, his eyes never leaving Daniel. He bound Daniel's wrists tightly, the coarse rope biting into his skin. Daniel winced, his mind racing for a way out. Mitch then tied Daniel's ankles together, ensuring he couldn't move. Finally, Mitch stuffed a cloth into Daniel's mouth, securing it with a strip of duct tape. "There. That should keep you quiet," Mitch sneered, stepping back to admire his handiwork. "Now, you can think about what you've done." Daniel struggled against the ropes, his muffled protests falling on deaf ears. Mitch grabbed the contract and left the office, leaving Daniel bound and gagged on the floor. The door slammed shut, and Daniel was alone in the dimly lit office. He strained against the ropes, his wrists burning with each movement. The taste of the cloth in his mouth was bitter, and the tape made it difficult to breathe. He scanned the room for anything that could help him, but the office was spotless, everything neatly in its place. Panic began to set in as he realized how helpless he truly was. Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity. The office grew darker as the sun set, and Daniel's situation became increasingly desperate. He knew he had to stay calm, but the frustration and fear gnawed at him. His mind raced with thoughts of escape, but every attempt seemed futile. Daniel Shin lay on the cold office floor, his body tightly bound with coarse ropes that cut into his skin with every subtle movement. The ropes around his wrists were especially tight, making his hands feel numb as he strained against them. His ankles were similarly secured, leaving him no room to kick or move his legs. Daniel screamed into his gag in a pathetic attempt to be heard. The gag in his mouth was particularly uncomfortable. Mitch had shoved a cloth deep into his mouth, making it difficult to breathe, and then secured it with layers of duct tape that pulled at the corners of his lips. The taste of the cloth was bitter and dry, and every breath through his nose was a struggle. He rolled onto his side, hoping to gain some leverage, but the ropes held firm. Each twist and turn only seemed to tighten the knots further. His mind raced, searching for any possible escape. He glanced around the dimly lit office, eyes landing on the neat desk, bookshelves, and the safe that had sealed his fate. Frustration gnawed at him as he pulled harder on the ropes. The fibers bit into his skin, leaving raw red marks on his wrists and ankles. He tried to call for help, but the gag muffled his cries, reducing them to faint, desperate grunts. In the silence of the office, the only sounds were his labored breathing and the occasional creak of the ropes as he struggled. The taste of the cloth grew more unbearable with each passing minute, and the duct tape around his mouth felt like a vice. Daniel's suit, once pristine, was now disheveled and wrinkled from his constant movements. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, trickling down his face as he fought against his restraints. His chest heaved with exertion, and his muscles ached from the effort of trying to free himself. The night wore on, and Daniel's struggles grew weaker. The ropes were expertly tied, leaving no room for movement. The gag stifled his cries for help, and the silence of the office was oppressive. He felt a sense of hopelessness wash over him as he lay there, bound and gagged, with no one to come to his rescue. Daniel's mind oscillated between hope and despair. He knew he couldn't give up, but the reality of his predicament weighed heavily on him. Every attempt to free himself seemed futile, yet he kept fighting, driven by the sheer will to survive and the hope that someone would find him before it was too late. As the hours dragged on, Daniel's strength began to wane. His struggles grew weaker, but he refused to succumb to the overwhelming sense of helplessness. He continued to test the bonds, his determination unwavering even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, the office remained eerily quiet, save for the faint rustle of papers and the hum of the air conditioning. Daniel Shin lay exhausted on the cold floor, his body still bound and aching from his night-long struggle. His suit was crumpled and soaked with sweat, and his eyes, red and tired, barely fluttered open. The sound of keys jingling broke the silence as the office door creaked open. In stepped Javier, the janitor, a middle-aged man with a sturdy build and a grizzled beard. He whistled a cheerful tune, pushing his cleaning cart ahead of him. As he rounded the corner to Daniel's office, he stopped dead in his tracks. Javier's eyes widened as he took in the sight of Daniel, tied up and gagged on the floor. A myriad of emotions flickered across his face, surprise, concern, and then something else. A slow, calculating smile spread across his lips. "Well, well, Mr. Shin," Javier muttered, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Looks like you had a rough night." Daniel begged for release into his gag. Daniel's eyes pleaded with Javier, trying to convey his desperate need for help. But Javier's mind was already made up. Memories of his denied vacation request flooded back. He had asked Daniel for time off to go on a fishing trip, a rare chance to spend time with his son. Daniel had coldly refused, citing company policy and workload. Javier's smile widened as he bent down, pretending to check the ropes. "Don't worry, Mr. Shin. I'll take good care of you." He set to work cleaning the office, meticulously dusting and vacuuming around Daniel's helpless form. The hum of the vacuum cleaner drowned out Daniel's muffled protests. Javier took his time, making sure every surface sparkled. When he was done, Javier stood over Daniel, his eyes glinting with mischief. He tightened the knots around Daniel's wrists and ankles, ensuring they were as snug as possible. Daniel winced, his struggles renewed but still futile. He even grabbed a roll of heavy-duty masking tape and meticulously covered Daniel's mouth more to make sure not a peep could be heard. Daniel screamed into his gag. "You always were a stickler for detail, Mr. Shin," Javier said with a chuckle. "Wouldn't want those knots coming loose now, would we?" As a final touch, Javier walked to the office door and flipped the "in" sign to out to lunch. He looked back at Daniel, who lay there, helpless and humiliated. "Enjoy your day off, Mr. Shin," Javier said, tipping an imaginary hat. "Maybe next time you'll think twice about denying a man his well-earned rest." With that, Javier wheeled his cleaning cart out of the office, leaving Daniel bound and gagged on the floor. The office door clicked shut behind him, and the silence returned, broken only by Daniel's muffled groans. The hours stretched on as Daniel lay there, the sun climbing higher in the sky. The once proud businessman was now a prisoner in his own office, left to contemplate his decisions and their consequences. The taste of the gag grew more unbearable, and the ropes bit deeper into his skin, but there was nothing he could do. And so, the day dragged on, each minute an eternity, as Daniel awaited rescue. The office remained quiet, the out-to-lunch sign on the door a cruel reminder of Javier's petty revenge. Daniel's fate was left hanging in the balance, the end of his ordeal nowhere in sight.